Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Fest Forum 2000 breakfast. My name is Tomáš Vrba and I'm chair of the board of directors of Forum 2000. And I'm glad to welcome and introduce today our first special guest. I'm going to give the floor in 2 or 3 minutes to Croatian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Vesna Pusić. Vesna Pusić is a politician, a scholar, and a brave woman. Already when she studied sociology, she was a co-founder of first feminist movement in then Communist Czechoslovakia, and it was far from being welcomed by authorities at that time. Madam Vesna Pusić's interest in politics developed gradually, and if you look at her academic career, among her themes of interest are always sociological aspects of politics. Among her books are publications like Democracies and Dictatorships, The Leaders and the Managers, and Industrial Democracy and Civil Society. So these interests gradually went to next step after Minister Pusić was elected in the Croatian parliament. She was elected 3 times. She ran for presidency in Croatia, but now, starting from last year, she serves as a foreign minister of the Republic of Croatia. After Minister Pusić gives her introductory remarks, something like 10 up to 15 minutes, we'll still have something like 15 minutes for questions and answers. But then I'll invite you all to move to the main forum hall for the opening of the conference and the first panel. So about 10 minutes to 9, we are supposed to leave the room. And now, please, Minister Pusić, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Vrba. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you very much for inviting me to something that you organized in the memory of the person who was definitely inspiration of our youth, and for many people has stayed the inspiration for moving from different walks of life, in my case from academia to politics, as a response to the eternal question, what can I do for my part of the world, for my country, and what can I do for my conscience? And therefore I will start with a quotation. For the question is whether the brighter future is really always so distant. What if, on the contrary, it has been here for a long time already, and only our own blindness and weakness has prevented us from seeing it around us and within us, and kept us from developing it. This, as some of you would remember, first of all, this was written in 1978. This was written exactly 34 years ago, in October of 1978, when brighter future seemed extremely far away to very many people in this part of Europe, and to very many people all around the world when they looked at this part of Europe. However, although this was written and it was, of course, written by Václav Havel. This is how the power of the powerless ends. What if brighter future has already arrived? What if brighter future asks us to be active now, asks us to see it now, to be able to see it now, and to start working for it now? And although this has been written 34 years ago, it applies, I would say, completely to what we are facing today. Today, again, we are at a period in European history, at a period in developing European institutions, in the period of our cooperation within Europe, where somehow it seems that better times are behind us, or somehow it seems that we cannot quite understand or see where is it that we are going, and especially where is it that we would like to go. It is true that today is very, very different in spite of all our problems, in spite of all our dilemmas, in spite of having almost lost the political vision and have almost completely focused on our economic problems. In spite of all that, I think there is no doubt that today is easier than 1978 in our part of Europe. That today, in spite of all of this, it's easier to think a better political future, to think political models, visions, ideas that could bring us again together, that could give us a sense of direction. And certainly it is easier to live on a simple, everyday level than it was in 1978. However, somehow today we feel that there is no one person, no group of people that gives us this sense of direction, this sense of having a political future, having a common brighter future that starts now, than there was in 1978. Times were much darker, but ideas were much brighter than ours. And when we are thinking of that, in a way, it comes all back to us. It comes back to us who are sitting here, comes back to people we know, to our friends. We are now the people who will have to start thinking about a better future now, who have the task to recognize the possibility that we actually could have a better future now, and that what we started and what other people started before us actually has not been completed, has not been brought to its complete realization, and that this now is our task. When at that time Czechoslovakia joined the European Union, and I will focus on this issue because it seems that this is the area in which we not only have to, but must look for a better future. When now, what is now the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic joined the European Union, the key topics were human rights, was justice, was freedom of the individual, was the freedom to act. The key figures were Václav Havel, Adam Michnik, Bronislav Geremek. Today, not even 10 years later, the key issues are the economy. The economic crisis, how do we deal with this? The key figures, or the key figure, if you want, is Mario Draghi. Not that I have anything against Mario Draghi, I think he's an extremely smart and capable man, but it shows the move from having political ideas that lead you to dealing with the immediate issues and problems and focusing exclusively on immediate issues and problems that trouble you. And whereas the entire development of every state, and certainly the entire development of European Union, was a permanent interplay and interaction of economic and political issues, of trying to achieve political goal by pushing them through economic models and vice versa. What we are faced with today, in my opinion, is that politics has been a little bit lost, that it has to some extent disappeared from our current debates, that we are not asking questions of what kind of societies we've become, of what kind of political future do we want, of what kind of goals do we want to achieve as Europe, or as we sometimes call it, the European family. We are more focused on the economic crisis, on more selfish issues, because very often austerity brings with it or loses the possibility to feel compassion, possibility to understand and see things that are not right in front of your nose, and breed focus on oneself and breed selfishness. And in that sense, political issues in today's Europe are thought of almost as an afterthought to trying to deal with things at hand. It was last summer, last June, when the 4 important and wise men put together interesting paper describing what Europe would need to do. And it spoke of 4 different forms of integration. One, the longest, was fiscal integration. It had in this paper about 2 pages. The next was budgetary integration of European member states. It had about 1.5 pages. The third was integration of economic policies. It had 1 page. And at the end, 1/3 of a page, this big, was the issue of political integration of Europe. It was brought there as an afterthought to all different levels of economic integration. I don't know whether this was the case because everybody thought they had to focus on things at hand. They had to focus on problems that they were facing in Greece, in Southern Europe in general, but in Europe in general in terms of moving from economic prosperity to problems, crisis, austerity, conflict, and that they had to deal with that as a problem at hand, without thinking about the basic political ideas that lead Europe. And somehow in this problems with austerity, in this ambivalence between saving and spending, in this ambivalence about the southern neighbors, and on the other hand, animosity towards northern neighbors from the south, the basic political ideas of Europe, of the possibility to form a community of values, has gradually disappeared. has gradually come down to this 1/3 of one page, where maybe at the end, after we've taken care of integrating budgets and integrating fiscal policy and harmonizing and coordinating economic policies, maybe there is also some space for political debate and political values. However, the whole idea of Europe is alive. The whole idea of good polity in Europe is alive. The whole idea of having economic problems exists because this Europe was formed, this Europe was led by people like Havel, by people who thought political ideas, who had political ideas, who understood political common goals, who understood values that bring people together, who understood that there is no purpose in having a state if it doesn't defend human rights, that there is no purpose in having institutions if they don't understand the concept of solidarity, together with competition, that there is no purpose of having Europe if it's not based on common values that recognize a very basic two concepts. And I would say these basic two concepts are individual dignity and the same right to human rights by every person. It is hard to say whether in today's Europe this has been forgotten or this has been taken for granted. Either way, it needs an awakening call. And there is no better historical figure, no better person, and above all, no better citizen than Václav Havel and his memory to bring us back to the basic, to the current, to the fundamental, and most important of all, to the question of future. And this is what is that we politically want. What kind of societies to produce, what kind of institutions do we want? And if we lose ourselves in trying to resolve economic problems without understanding where do we want to go politically, and what do we want our institutions to do politically, and what kind of citizens do we want to be, there is a great danger that we might, like Havel's shopkeeper, end up putting false signs in our shop windows, end up sending messages through unintelligible script that outside of our own small cultures nobody will understand. And most of all, it is to remind us that there are no other Havels apart from us. There are no other leaders. There are no other thinkers apart from us who live now, whose Europe it is, whose task it is, and whose goal it should be. So let us say that in the memory of Václav Havel, who will always remind us that we could be more than we are today, and that maybe we could lead instead of follow, and that maybe we could have ideas that are bigger and more important than today, than what we are doing today. Let us, in the memory of a person who could see hope and who could see future from this place in 1978, let us, in his memory, try to create a new path for Europe. Try to create a path for Europe that will understand that it has goals that are primarily political, goals that will create a more just societies, and goals that will, as its support, have functioning economies, but not as its primary objective. Its primary objective is to create good polity. It has always been, and it will always be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you for giving us another example how to combine political leadership with the intellectual leadership. And now I believe that everybody understands better why Vesna Pusić is the right person to lead her own country to the family of European democracies, and still thinking how to make this family, how to make Europe, how to make democracy better. Now, please, your questions. We have about 10 minutes for that. Yes, please, Professor Avineri.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. I'm Shlomo Avineri from Israel, not from Europe, but a little bit of Europe, if I may say so. You reminded us of the primacy of politics. And I think this is something very important, especially in this time of economic crisis. And the issue with the primacy of politics has to do something similar with the issue of great literature. Great literature usually doesn't come out of confident, bourgeois, middle-class societies. It comes out of crisis. I mean, we saw it in Central Eastern Europe, in the Soviet Union, Czech Republic, in Poland. And the question is it a possibility to bring back the primacy of politics when there is no great human crisis and everybody is concerned with what you said is their own economic well-being, either individually or collectively? Where can one get the kind of inspiration for what you call the primacy of politics, which is really the primacy of ideas when people are concerned about their daily bread?
Thank you very much, Professor Avineri, for this question. As you said, it's really worse crisis than this one that produce great ideas. And it is true that today people are concerned with their daily bread, but at the same time, this daily bread happens on a much, 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 much higher level than it did 30 years ago in this part of the world. So what people mean by daily bread is actually a relatively affluent standard of living. And if I understood your question correctly, it is this relative affluence that you think has killed the capacity to produce great ideas. But maybe it's not hardship so much that breeds great idea. Maybe it's the capacity for want of a better word, for compassion with others, that hardship sometimes creates conditions in which then some people rise above the everyday hardship and feel compassion for others, have ideas that are not only focused on their own well-being, but maybe on some sort of broader goals. And in that sense, I feel there is a lot of possibility today. In your part of the world, for instance, a lot of space for great ideas in the Middle East, in the southern Mediterranean. For instance, when we were discussing our, let's say, objectives in our own foreign policy in Croatia, but also in the countries of the region, because we are also part of the Mediterranean region, this was an area where we looked for partnerships, for trying to share ideas and see how you rebuild post-conflict societies, how you rebuild institutions. The possibility to also look towards Eastern Partnership, to see what's happening in countries to the eastern border of the European Union. So there are, I would say, a lot of possibilities if you are to think a little bigger as a member, let's say. I'm speaking now from the position of the European Union. If you're just to look into your navel, then I agree with you. There are no great ideas there. But just a little bit looking around you, there are a lot of possibilities to reinvigorate some of the old but most successful ideas. There was a lot of criticism and cynicism about the European Union getting the Nobel Peace Prize. I thought it was extremely deserved. Maybe not for what the European Union is doing today, but it's awarded for past achievements. And it showed, I would say that the cynicism, among other things, about this prize, showed that peace has been taken so much for granted by the old member states that it's not seen as an achievement anymore. It's seen as, what else is there? Now, who are coming from other parts of the world, we know that there are other possibilities, and these other possibilities are pretty horrific in Europe and outside of Europe. And in that sense, I think we have to not only count our blessings, but point to and build on such achievements, not necessarily always looking only at ourselves, but looking just a little bit around us. And there, I think we can find even sufficient hardship for great ideas.
Thank you. Next question. Julian Nagala. Just a second, please. The mic.
Could you say something about how one overcomes the absence of goodwill in moving the process forward, the absence of goodwill among leaders, the absence of leadership, particularly in southeastern Europe?
By creating it. I see no other way. If you speak about southeastern Europe in particular, although I would say it's to some extent the case in all of Europe, but to that particular question, Havel is a fantastic answer. We are no Havels, there's no doubt about that. But we are what we've got. And getting out of a clientelist mentality is probably the first and the most important step. And by clientelist mentality, I mean the sense that there is somebody else and that you expect somebody else who will do something for you or who will take over the responsibility, even if that person or regime or whoever is at the same time doing that in exchange for your freedom, that there are always some other people who will take the responsibility and take the lead. It's just us, and that's what I keep emphasizing, and this is precisely the reason why I keep emphasizing that, because if a sufficient number of people understands that it's their responsibility, from that group of people, gradually the leaders will come. I'm sure you've seen an old book by a Polish sociologist called Teresa Taranska that was called Oni, which in Croatian, in Polish, and probably also in Czech means them. And it was a book basically of interviews with Poljska nomenklatura. And in it was called Oni because all the people who were in power before the changes spoke of that government and of that power not as us, but as them, as Oni. Oni did this and Oni did that. And in some ways that could be, that's the perfect description of this mentality when over many years of a specific political culture, the sense of responsibility for your own country, for the political decisions, we are all small countries there, there is no Oni. There is just us who are there. And by making as many people, especially as many young people, aware of that they not only should have the responsibility, but should have the courage to take up leadership of their own countries, and there is no other authority who will do it for them. For instance, I started by saying early on, right after the wars in former Yugoslavia and in Croatia, started by saying there is no international community. International community doesn't exist because the mentality was, you know, the international community didn't do this for us or didn't give us this or prevented us from doing that. Nobody cares if you don't care yourself. And nobody can help you if you first cannot help yourself and you don't develop the capacity, the self-confidence, and the awareness that it should be you. And I think this is the only way how you can go about it. I don't see any other possibility, and through that, it's also very important to rehabilitate politics as such, because of the way it was practiced, it has developed an extremely negative reputation. I literally almost cannot think of any other profession or job that has a lower status than politics. And this is extremely dangerous. This is extremely dangerous because even to repair your shoes, you go to somebody who you respect and whose craftsmanship you respect. But for the decisions that will influence everybody's lives, you think that can be and are being made by the lowest of the low.
Thank you. The last question, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Ruth Onyango from Kenya, and like you, and I applaud your achievements, truly. Part politician and part academic. But since you are Foreign Affairs Minister, I'm sure you are familiar with other parts of the world. I'm just wondering, because really late presidents' words and writings impacted all of us globally. This is my first time in Prague, in this part of the world, but I knew Havel because he became president of the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia at that time, but he was a literary giant. That's how we knew. And so his writings actually impacted all of us. Now I'm just wondering that what's happening in Europe, what's happening in America, it's not impacting only yourselves. It's also impacting like the African continent. And as you cry and as you see the impact of the economic crisis, some of us have been living with this for decades. We've been living with this for decades. So I'm just wondering, even as on the African continent, strive for a better life, strive for what you have had. What lessons can we actually learn from what's happening now in Europe at the moment? Yeah. Thanks a lot.
This is an extremely difficult question, but first of all, I truly believe that most of the things, including most of the political writings of Václav Havel, are universally applicable. And you can take the power of the powerless and run with it in Kenya or in any other place in Africa or Asia or Latin America, because it brings to sort of into focus something that's absolutely universally human. And this is that all the institutions all the, from states to a free society to everything, is basically in support and should be in support of a dignified human existence. And in order to live normally, you shouldn't be expected to lie, you shouldn't be expected to write between or understand between the lines, you should be, and that in a way being forced, as he said, to live in a lie, your freedom is actually taken away from you. And I think this is completely universal. That, it applies everywhere. And if you use that as a guiding idea, I think it's a very good test when one enters politics to every once in a while ask yourself, do I really think that? Why am I saying this? Is this somehow, and this is a very good check for, sort of reality check for whether you should be in politics any longer, because it's not necessarily that a person can preserve her or his sanity by being in politics his or her entire life. So it's important to occasionally check it in this way. What can you and what can we and what can, universally, what can be learned from the European experience? First of all, the whole story about the horrible crisis and economic problems. The European Common Market, as we speak, is still the richest economic area on the planet. The living standards in Europe are still among the highest in the world. So with all the problems and all the moaning, what has been lost is this absolute and unquestionable affluence. And this has introduced a sense of uncertainty, which actually you are much better at managing than most people in Europe, because you're much more used to living with uncertainty and unpredictability than the Europeans, who have over the last, let's say, 50 years, have sort of developed this sense of security and have lost the capacity to deal with crisis. And this is something that, in a way, for instance, one policy that was considered extremely important and successful in Europe was the enlargement of the European Union. This now is considered almost an anathema, almost like nobody wants to talk to, and European Union is just about to enlarge onto my own country, and hopefully after that onto some other countries of my region. Why is it become an anathema? Because it's perceived as increasing uncertainty, as adding, in a difficult time, adding additional uncertainty to Europe. In my opinion, it should be embraced, because one of the problems here is precisely the fact that dealing with unpredictable situations, with uncertainty, is something that has made Europe a little bit, how can I say, lazy in terms of thinking of its own development. So don't lose some of the things that you already have, because Europe also had that capacity. It was extremely, the whole idea of the European Union was actually dealing with uncertainty and reducing uncertainty. So don't lose that capacity. It's the other thing that Europeans have learned and are still learning and might be useful in combination with this capacity to deal with uncertainty, and that is the potential to develop cooperation, to work together on things that are not necessarily only one country's interest or preference, to try to work across borders. This is probably the best that Europe has done, to recognize that there are certain goals, certain profits that can be achieved by working together. And in the fine balance between conflict and cooperation, maybe what Europe can teach is the capacity to cooperate.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
And now we have about 5 minutes to move upstairs for the opening session of the conference. Thank you.